Mountains of wheat. Sack after sack, stacked as far as the eye can see. 2 years ago, while filming a story on food security, we chanced upon this massive wheat storage facility in Haryana, a few kilometers outside Delhi. The harvest that year, and the year before, had been good. And yet, throughout the country, people who needed these bags of wheat the most weren't going to get them. 1/3 of India's public wheat stock is either burnt, sold in the black market, or quite simply, just left to rot.
Look, there are insects.
What happened? Why is it rotten?
Because it's open. It's not covered. During the rainy season, it's rained so lot, so they got rotten.
In a country where nearly half the children suffer from malnutrition, $10 billion worth of food, 10% of the country's total production, is destroyed each year. The waste highlights the shortcomings of the distribution system.
There's a long history of government interventions in pricing and procurement policies in developing countries. In many countries, the history is not a happy one.
South Asia still has the highest number of malnourished people in the world, almost 331 million. And this number is increasing every day. Is it the responsibility of governments to guarantee access to food for everyone with procurement and distribution systems? How do they ensure the stability of prices with market interventions? These positions have been challenged in recent years in national and international markets, with the poor being most severely affected.
Price stability has lately become a challenge because of global price spikes after 2007-8, when the global prices went through the roof and people could not figure out really what had gone wrong.
Most of the people that live below the poverty line or around the poverty line spend most of their incomes in food. And any inflation, any rise in the food price hits them heavily, much more than could hit a Western person. And unfortunately, in the past years, the inflation of food and fuel has been substantial.
In 2010 in India, tomato prices rose by 55%. Onion prices shot up by 125%. And over the last year, bell pepper prices skyrocketed by 250%.
Governments are always tempted to change prices. So in very poor countries, governments try to keep prices low, especially for consumers, especially in cities. And India has a long record of doing that through ration shops. And then as countries get richer and the interests of urban people in keeping prices low becomes less important, governments are very keen to keep prices high. And a government can say to farmers, we'll raise your prices in a way that's very visible to a small, clearly identified group of people, the people who are growing the crop. And they know they're getting that benefit from government. Meanwhile, consumers who suffer from the higher price may not even know that the higher price they're paying is because of the policy. And so they don't protest, but the supporters support.
In South Asia, the key issue around pricing and procurement is how governments can manage and change the existing systems which provide subsidized food prices to the poor and have become very costly and burdensome. How can the governments there continue to guarantee the access of poor people to food without the burdens of expensive subsidies and without destroying incentives for farmers?
Is the state still able to protect both consumers and farmers? How should it fix the balance between the interests of the consumer and those of the farmer? What are the various systems operational today in South Asia, and how could they be improved? To find out, we traveled across Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. Nestled in the foothills of the Himalayas, Nepal. 26 million people live here, in one of the poorest countries in the world. 66% of the country's labor force is employed in the agricultural sector, yet it draws only 35% of its GDP from it. In 2010, while the economy grew at 4.5%, agricultural growth registered a weak 1.25% increase. In Nepal, agriculture is far too dependent on climatic conditions, especially for a country frequently struck by natural catastrophes.
We stopped cultivation since 2003 because our land was swept away by the flood. This area where the debris is deposited is all our land. No, we don't have any crops.
It's extremely difficult. Not only simply difficult, but extremely difficult. Sometimes, when the rainfall doesn't come on time, all our crops die and vegetables can't be planted. It's difficult for farmers. Fertilizers are not so easily available, and it's the same for pesticides. Sometimes farmers have to pay double the price to get fertilizers.
Ravaged by a civil war that lasted close to 10 years, Nepal's food security has been seriously compromised. Even after 2 years of good harvests, and with more than 800,000 tons of surplus expected for 2012, Nepali villages still have no access to the procurement system. The main reasons for Nepal's difficulties are its isolation and the lack of infrastructure, which complicates the work of the peasants and related intermediaries.
If the road will have better traffic, if we get seeds and fertilizers in time, it will be good for us. Even if we have good harvest, because of low movement of vehicles, we do not get customers easily to pick the products.
When we say that market don't works, in most of the cases in the mountain region especially, is the absence of market due to absence of infrastructure. So if there is no road, if there is no vehicle movement, if there is no power for electricity, it's very difficult to establish a functioning market. In certain other cases, the food is transported via many intermediaries or with porters or with other transportation like animals. And the price for this transportation has to be accounted in the final price of the product. So the product, you may find it rarely, but even when you find it, may be very expensive for you.
Grandmother does not like traveling by bus because she vomits. She refused to travel by bus, so we walked. Anyway, the vehicles don't operate regularly. It's certainly very difficult to carry the loads till the field in the scorching heat.
The young, fragile Nepali Republic survives on international aid. The country, since the 1980s, has been a net importer of cereal grains. Today, Nepal's system of procurement and distribution is extremely fragmented. Most often, farmers can only sell their produce to small intermediaries, who are also suffering from a lack of infrastructure.
Generally, people purchase taking Kathmandu's selling price as a reference. But by the time they take it to Kathmandu, they will suffer a loss. Every region has a different optimum season for growing vegetables. So if the government would fix a standard price, then farmers would benefit. But the government doesn't do that.
These images provided by the WFP illustrate that food aid sustains even the remotest parts of the country, with debilitating political consequences.
When you have to deliver this food at the very high, in the very inaccessible remote places of Nepal, where you have to carry this food in helicopter and a lot of monies are involved. There were a lot of cases of misuse of these resources being misused. So there was a pressure from many quarters to eliminate subsidy and instead maybe go for another production increasing programs.
In neighbouring India, the remarkable turnaround in what were once two of the country's poorest and most corrupt states, Chhattisgarh and Bihar, offers Nepal models to emulate and, vitally, a ray of hope. The eastern state of Chhattisgarh is one of India's rice bowls, with large-scale productions of the paddy crop. 10 years ago, the state was one of the worst performers in India's procurement system. Wastage, corruption, losses, you name it, Chhattisgarh had it. In 2003, the government of the new state decided to undertake sweeping reforms of the distribution system. Before, only 50% of the rice reached its intended targets. Today, that proportion is much higher, with leakages limited to 10%. The key to this success? A combination of measures that have made the supply line more efficient, bypassing corrupt middlemen and agents. Using technology, people have been empowered. A first and crucial reform was to hand over the management of ration shops from private dealers to community institutions.
After 2003, we finished with the existing system of privatization and everything switched over to cooperative societies. Village councils, women welfare organizations got role in distribution.
Private dealers basically act in a nexus with politicians to milk the system to make money, whereas community institutions, even though they are susceptible to corruption themselves, are a little bit more accountable.
In the village of Jerbe in Janjgir district, the villagers control the PDS and in turn their own food destinies. All these men are members of the Seva Sahakariya Samiti, a cooperative which manages the PDS shops.
The first installment is 50 rupees.
The shops receive an allotment of bags in relation to the number of ration card holders in the village. Salt is free, and each card holder is entitled to 35 kilos of rice, which they are sold for 1 or 2 rupees a kilo, the cheapest rate in India, even if the state government buys the same rice for 17 or 18 times the price. Today, in this village, everyone's able to eat their fill and there is no rotting stock because the habitants receive exactly the quantities that they need. In the new system, instead of requiring the manager of a ration shop to come to a public warehouse to collect the grain, government trucks deliver the grain directly to the village to prevent siphoning en route.
Basically, these private dealers would take their full grain requirement from the government, but before reaching the village would sell it off to the private market. And then once they reach the village, they say, oh, well, you know, we only got so much, and so now we can't give you your full grain. And when the government truck comes into the village with everyone's grain, people see how much grain has come, and therefore it becomes easier for them to monitor and to prevent being cheated by the manager.
In this state cooperative go-down, the grains have been procured from different sources. A part has been bought from farmers from within the state, while the rest is imported from other parts of the country. For the 10-day distribution period each month, more than a dozen trucks ferry supplies to the PDS community shops. And that's where the biggest change, a veritable revolution, has occurred. All the data is stored electronically, reducing the chances of corruption. The movement of the bags and trucks is even supervised via GPS.
As you have just seen now, one truck loaded with grain and released. So far we have online GPS system which we follow strictly. Under this system, every truck has one pair of mobile and our cell in Raipur, the capital, locate its position every time. So we can keep an eye on them if they're going on their location or not. The main reason was the truck drivers, which didn't used to reach the destination on time. And they also tried to steal the goods, so the goods did not reach to the destination point on time. That is why government has decided to fix this system in the PDS, so that right quantity of goods can be transported at the right place.
I think one of the lessons is that helping farmers through price policies, whether for outputs or for inputs, may not be the right way to go. It may make more sense to support agriculture by investing in agricultural research and technology, or by investing in rural transportation infrastructure or electrification, providing other kinds of public goods and services to support the agricultural sector may be a better way to go than trying to intervene in prices and in markets directly.
Although Chhattisgarh's model has been a success, it is contingent on the state's budget surplus as well as its extremely high agricultural productivity. In neighbouring Bihar, which doesn't have the same advantages, a different experiment is currently taking place. In Bihar, the government faced massive leakages of food and oil through its PDS. In 2007, With its back to the wall, the state became the first in the country to try out a new system of public distribution.
We are saying that instead of distributing physically the quantities of wheat and rice, we should also experiment and do some pilots of giving income to the people. Those who are poor, give them either food coupons or give them some extra money to buy any food that they like.
Coupons now form one of the cores of Bihar's food distribution system. Under the system, families below the poverty line receive 12 food coupons every year, one for each month. Households then exchange one coupon for food grains with licensed PDS dealers in their district. The dealer deposits the coupon with the administration and gets back the quantity of grain distributed by him, and the cycle continues. The coupons are distributed to cardholders in May and June, in public by government functionaries, in meetings like this one.
This is 14 kilos of wheat, 21 kilos of rice, and backside this is for kerosene. It is better than the earlier system because now, in order to get the grains, you only have to give a coupon. It makes it more difficult for shopkeepers to steal grains or get extra grains.
But despite this official's claims, black marketing and corruption hasn't completely gone down. A recent survey by a leading news magazine showed that there are significant problems in multiple districts. The system may not be working perfectly, but the coupons have made a difference.
Of course it's made a difference. Now when we go to the shop, we get grains on time. We get oil as well. Yes, earlier it was difficult.
One of the major problems is shifting food from the godowns to the dealers in time to reimburse them. Even the most enthusiastic coupon-backing politicians admit storage is a major issue.
We lack godowns. Even though we're making some of our own, the government's Food Corporation of India has a major shortage of godowns. If we had more storage, we could store more grains effectively and give the farmers a better price for their products too.
But even with its evolving distribution systems, there is one glaring failure in India's food management policy: storage. Weighed down by an inefficient public sector, massive stocks of grains often go to waste. However, Bangladesh, with its liberalized food sector, has enjoyed some notable successes when it comes to food stock management. Surrounded by its big and noisy neighbor, Bangladesh has a reputation for being a slow mover, a sleepy country beset with all kinds of problems. What is less well known is that it is also one of the most agriculturally progressive nations in South Asia. Over the past quarter of a century, the country's food and agricultural policies of liberalization and infrastructure building have given Bangladesh one of the highest growth rates in the size of food grain markets in South Asia. Much of the reform was enabled when the country dramatically improved its rice output in the 1970s through the cultivation of high-yielding varieties in the May to July Boro season.
We are more developed now. I'm almost 33 and I've seen many people starving earlier. People couldn't make a living. After Boro, we don't have scarcity nowadays. When it comes to food, we are now self-sufficient. We don't have that need anymore. We're able to feed ourselves.
The Boro crop share went from just 15% in the 70s to more than 40% in the 1990s.
The big thing that governments have done when they've done it well is technological innovation, where governments fund the particularly crop breeding and the development of new varieties that are adapted to a particular location. The private sector on its own will never do those things, so either government does it or it's not done. And if the government does it well, it's tremendously effective.
Rice production has more than tripled since our independence. It was 10 million ton in the 70s, now it is more than 30 million ton. So the public sector, government cannot, tackle or in terms of distribution, procurement and distribution such a big amount. So private sector has a role.
Since 1994, food grain distribution has been privatized, restrictions on international trade have been lifted, and the government presence in food grain markets has come down sharply. Private food grain stockers and millers like Jisamuddin now account for a majority of the food grain stocks in Bangladesh.
We are absolutely free. The government never comes here to monitor anything. All we need to have is a food license. In every season, we provide some rice to the government. Someone gives 20, someone gives 30 tons. This year I've received an allocation of 40 tons, so now we're going to give that much rice to the government.
Government has learned its lesson and does not intervene only in case when necessary to its regulatory framework. Otherwise, leave the private sector to work as efficiently as possible. It is immensely benefiting the country. It is coming at a lower cost. All the function, the trading cost and other costs associated with imports, I think. Now the private sector, as I say, is claiming the lion's share of the import and stabilizing, contributing. When there is a shortage in the market, they are responding very positively. And now the government is, I think the country is having greater food security because of the role played by private traders. Government should not keep more stock than it really needs, I think. So there is opportunity cost in terms of that money fund could have been invested in rural infrastructure, money could be invested in other social welfare programs.
Indeed, the share of social welfare programs has increased from 32% in the pre-reform period to almost 85% in the post-reform period. The success of the private sector's involvement has allowed the government to downsize public food distribution schemes and allowed it to make poverty reduction a priority basis for grain allocation. One of the most effective has been the Food for Work program.
Food for Work is a good program. The project is a good one. We often repair connecting roads, the small paths that get damaged. We repair those too with these WFP schemes. Poor people like us wouldn't have survived if there were no programs like this. The program is helping us. Poor people have no jobs in this season, no work in the fields. This work brings great help to us. We can even control the market price with the help of this Food for Work program. When the price of rice gets high and when we provide the rice to these laborers, the market gets a little regulated. When this man gets 8 or 10 kilos of rice, he sells it in the market and gets around 4 kilos of rice. And his family is able to function well with that.
Remarkably, Bangladesh has perhaps been the only South Asian economy to have completely dismantled its food procurement and distribution system and still have achieved considerable success in reducing poverty rates and increasing agricultural productivity. Today, South Asia is at a crossroads, and as we have seen, the overwhelming need is to make changes to the way agricultural pricing and procurement policies in the region are designed. The debate about the value of government intervention still exists, but it is advisable if buffer stocks are maintained with the objectives of keeping prices low during shortages and secondly, to ensure universal access to food. That being said, the example of Bangladesh shows that there are major gains to be had from re-evaluating the costs of government intervention.
We've seen all kinds of government failures. When we've seen successes, they've been generally of a similar type. So it's like Tolstoy had for happy, at the beginning of Anna Karenina, all happy families are alike and unhappy families are all unhappy in different ways. It's a little bit like that with state intervention in agriculture. That recipe of competitive markets, open trade, and lots of public investment using tax revenue to do R&D, basic infrastructure, that's what worked in the history of the successful East Asian countries, first Japan, then Korea, Taiwan, and so forth.
Ultimately, with the large amounts of malnutrition and hunger in South Asia, governments in the region must make it a priority to encourage innovative and sustainable solutions to the challenges posed by agriculture.